Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first weekly live stream for National Safety Month for 2022. And this evening we have with us Matt Bouttell, our CEO. G'day, Matt.
G'day, Cody.
So before we kick things off this evening, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the sponsors that we've got for National Safety Month 2022. For the members who've been with us for a little while, you'll know that in October each year we hold National Safety Month, and as part of that we normally try and get a bunch of giveaways for our membership to take part in National Safety Month campaign areas. So this year and for week one of National Safety Month 2022, we do have RAAus as our primary sponsor, and RAAus are a long-term sponsor of National Safety Month and supporter of RAAus. Of course, for our week one prize pack, we've got a few different prizes that we're giving away. Each week we've got a different prize pack or series of prizes to give away throughout October. This week we've got a Sky Echo 2, we've got a GME PLB and a carry case, and we've got an RAAus subscriptions. Those three prizes will be drawn in the second week of November to be given away. To participate or to enter the draw to win, go to our National Safety Month website, raus.com.au/NSM, and enter the code word that will be given at some stage throughout the live stream this evening. So to kick things off this evening, we're talking about pilot safety for week one. And I just want to take the opportunity to have a little bit of a look at some of our main items that we're seeing throughout our statistics within occurrence reports that have been given to RAAus. So for our safety data for January to October 2022, to date we've had 40 accidents reported, 83 incidents, 9 aircraft that have been marked as destroyed, 18 aircraft that have received substantial damage in an accident or an incident, and unfortunately we've also had 4 fatal accidents so far in 2022. When we take a look at our top occurrence types, we've got engine failure or malfunction as the most highly occurring occurrence type for the year so far. We've also got near miss or separation events, of which we've had 15 so far in 2022. Loss of control events continue to rate highly, and we've had 13 of those reported. And also undercarriage collapse, we've had 8 occurrences resulting in undercarriage collapse and 6 hard landings. Now, those two occurrence types are often linked. A hard landing can result in undercarriage collapse. But of course, loss of control events were the most common cause of serious damage to aircraft and continue to rate highly in RAAus occurrence data. So takeoffs are optional. It's a bit of a theme for week one, and it's a little counterintuitive from the perspective of, obviously, we don't want to be stopping people from making takeoffs. We want to support aviation across Australia, but we also want to do so in a safe manner and when the conditions are right. Unfortunately, over the past 6 months, we have seen an increase in the number of serious accidents linked to environmental factors, decision-making, and pilot experience. And when we talk about pilot experience, we don't just mean total experience, but that can also link to currency and experience on aircraft type as well. Now, when we're talking about what we've seen over the last 6 months, there's a number of different reasons why we believe that we've seen an increase in environmental factors and experience factors. And that ties to our environment that we've seen throughout 2022, but also over the past couple of years. Obviously, we had extended lockdowns with COVID-19. And since then, we've also had La Nina weather conditions, and we've just had it reported that they're expecting a third year of those conditions. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is extended periods where pilots aren't able to operate and can't fly. And we're also seeing that lack of currency, which may be a poor combination at the end of the day. So we're really asking our pilots to ensure that weather conditions are suitable before going up and flying, but also making sure that you are current and that you've got the experience on type, you're recent, and you've completed your BFR. But of course, if you haven't done any of those things, reach out to an instructor and don't be tempted to operate in conditions that aren't favourable just because it's been a little while since you've been able to operate or because we've had extended periods of poor weather across the country. So in relation to that, Matt, you recently encountered a similar situation where you had travel plans which were interrupted by poor weather. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Cody. And I alluded to this, or I spoke to this in a recent from the CEO to our members. I was aiming to fly out to the William Creek fly-in, which is an annual event, and a place I've been before, which is fantastic. So I was very much looking forward to flying out there 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And along the way, I was also going to be doing some member forums as well. So, we talk about placing pressure on ourselves and, get their rightus and all of those things. And I think for me, it was about being conscious of that, having that additional pressure, get their rightus to go and speak to our members and to see our clubs, which, a lot of these places I still haven't been yet since I've been in this role. But anyway, I certainly, with such a large trip flying halfway across the country from Canberra to William Creek, I looked at the weather probably a week and a bit out to see what was happening, I suppose, what was happening in the Indian Ocean, coming across all the way across the Bight, heading towards Canberra. And it was pretty clear to me, a week out that things were going to look a bit dicey. So, that plan B started to form in my back pocket that I could pull out and, and potentially at that stage, perhaps I needed to cancel those member forums and be disappointed not going to watch the AFL Grand Final at William Creek, which turned out to be a godsend anyway because the Swans got done. But anyway, watching that weather come across, here in Canberra we've had pretty poor weather for 6 months, and so I knew that was sort of continuing. But there was a glimmer of hope. It looked all right outside of Canberra. And then probably 48 to 24 hours out, I had to, basically make the call from departure. I knew the weather was going to be unfavourable for departure, low cloud out of Canberra until it certainly got west of the range. But also looking further into the trip, because it was going to be a 6-day trip, I could see that there was going to be some pretty serious winds coming out of William Creek heading down towards Port Pirie, which is where I was headed. There's something like 50 knot winds forecast. So at the end of the day, I did all this planning. I even bought the food and lots of gear to take with me. But unfortunately, I had to cancel the member forums and not go on the trip. But you know what? At the end of the day, for me, that's part of aviation. It's part of, I didn't get to do stick and rudder, but I still got to play aviation in the sense that making those decisions, whilst really disappointing, to be frank, I was more than comfortable with making those decisions because I had a plan B and, good planning. And I know that William Creek will run it again next year. And let's hope we don't have a La Nina event this time next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's key there too in terms of aviation events. Thankfully, we seem to be coming out the tail end of COVID. And what that does mean is we are seeing clubs and different organisations running different events around the country. But unfortunately, with the poor weather conditions that we are seeing around the country, it's impacted a huge number of events already. We've seen Warbirds cancelled because of poor weather conditions announced recently. And, that temptation to push on because there's a barbecue or a flying event or even just flying with friends, it can be really hard to make that decision not to go or to make the decision to, take off, see what happens. And
it's hard for event organisers too, right? They've put in a lot of effort and they've planned. And, I was supposed to travel up to Wedderburn this weekend for the Wedderburn fly-in. And I was going to do a member forum there with our chair, Michael Monk. And, I think anyone who lives on the eastern seaboard, particularly Sydney, Canberra, around this area, We know the weather this week is dreadful, and full credit to the Wedderburn Club for making an early call. It's one of those challenges, I think, with the event organisers. If the weather is a bit, how you going? It might be good to the west, but it might be poor to the east. We're only going to get half the numbers. What does that look like? So it's a challenge not only for the aviators but for the event organisers and so on. So but special call out for me anyway to the Wedderburn Aero Club up in Sydney for making the call early, because it meant that all the punters, including myself, we could make alternative plans this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see event organisers also making that call early, rather than putting people in situations that are also unfavourable. But yeah, certainly from a safety perspective and what we've been seeing over the past, 6 months or so far this year is really that importance in terms of maintaining pilot currency, flying with an instructor if you haven't been able to fly for quite a period of time. But yeah, also not pushing when those weather conditions aren't favourable. So in relation to that and with regards to decision making from a human factors perspective, but also from a currency perspective, RAAus does have a number of resources available, and the pilot currency barometer is a tool that we put together during COVID-19 when people were really locked down for extended periods of time. And we really pushed safety messaging really quite hard during that period to promote that people were really careful when they returned to flight. And it was really great to see that we didn't see a significant increase in serious or fatal accidents during that period of time in 2021 and 2020. But unfortunately, as I mentioned there, we have seen 4 fatal accidents in 2022. And we believe that there is likely an increase in the number of activities taking place at the moment. So, we really want to send that message. Takeoffs are optional. Once you're in the air, there's nothing worse than wishing you were back on the ground. A number of us have experienced it, and it's not somewhere you want to be. So we really want to push that messaging in terms of key decision making.
Cody, mate. We've got a couple of questions there I might ask you about. There's a question there from Richard about BFRs. I might get you to answer that if we may.
So Richard said, my BFR is now about 2 to 3 months overdue, mainly due to the closure of Cessnock Airport. Having not flown since March 2022, how many hours would you suggest I complete before attempting the BFR? Does the BFR require the actual flying of a cross-country flight or just the planning of a cross-country flight? So in relation to how many hours should you do before doing your BFR, obviously if your BFR has expired, then you can't fly any hours until you've completed that. So please do go and see an instructor if that 2-year period has expired. If you are caught operating with an expired BFR, there's a range of implications. Obviously, BFRs are there for safety and ensuring that we haven't picked up bad habits, even though we might think that we're competent to operate. But also there's other implications such as insurance and the likes. With regards to completing of the BFR, now that's the different instructors will have slightly different outcomes in terms of exactly what they ask their students to run through. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of the instructor to ensure that they sign off the competencies as required within the syllabus for the conduct of a BFR. So I'd recommend that you reach out to your local flight instructor, have a chat with them and certainly go and fly with them. But we have seen a number of pilots operating with expired BFRs, and we've also seen that result in a number of serious accidents as well. So another message for tonight in terms of compliance, which I'll get to in just a minute, is certainly around not operating unless you are compliant prior to flight. Yeah,
and here's another one from Graham. Cody, with near misses 15, how many of these were related to poor radio work by pilots? And it might be worthwhile calling out some of the work we've been doing across industry with our uncontrolled aerodromes webinars.
Yeah, absolutely. So most members, or hopefully a number of members, will be aware that the CASA have really been putting a lot of effort into webinars and videos on operations at non-controlled aerodromes in the past few months. They've also got their new CASA Pilot Safety Hub, where they're hosting a lot of these resources. But Jill Bailey, Head of Flight Operations, and I didn't mention, but Jill was previously advertised to be with us tonight, but unfortunately she's been unable to make it, and we've had a change of plans, so you're stuck with us too. So if things do get too close to operational questions, we might have to take them on notice. But with relation to those near misses, what we do see is that a majority of those could have been avoided if it were for better radio communications. I think I've got a few statistics hopefully coming up later in the presentation, but over the last 5 years, obviously we've had quite a number of near miss or separation related events, and interestingly, in all of those, I believe all aircraft were fitted with a radio. So in most cases, when we're seeing these events, the aircraft are fitted with radios, and in a lot of situations, they are making appropriate calls too. But for some reason, there's a breakdown in situational awareness. If pilots are overloaded, obviously they start to miss bits and pieces. But also non-compliance in terms of standard operating procedures is a major factor when we see near miss and loss of separation events as well. But communication is absolutely key. Avoiding distractions in the circuit, put away that EFB, ensure that your eyes are outside, and really listen to any radio communications that might be taking place. But we'll have more on that shortly as well. So touching on a couple of these points as we move on, we wanted to touch base a little bit on member compliance, and we've mentioned it here in terms of that BFR, but there's a number of things that we really want our cohort to make sure that you're meeting compliance requirements before each and every flight. So obviously you've got your standard membership and your aircraft registration. These need to be current and up to date prior to flight in order to exercise the privileges of those authorizations or to operate that aircraft. And as I mentioned before, your flight review, please do make sure that your flight review hasn't expired. If it has, obviously you can't operate as a pilot in command, and you must do so under instruction. Also making sure if you have a requirement to hold a medical, that's up to date. If you have a medically significant condition or you're over 75, you need to make sure that a copy of that is sent through to our office each year. But also in terms of compliance for our instructors, we're seeing quite regularly that they will go out and renew their medical, but they won't send us through a copy to the office. And it's actually an ops manual requirement prior to flight that you not only have the medical, but you've actually supplied us with a copy. And if you haven't done that, it is considered a non-compliance as well. For instructors, also making sure any proficiency checks or renewals have been completed prior to flight, and aircraft maintenance as well. So making sure your service bulletins, your airworthiness directives, any scheduled maintenance, including the likes of the 5-year rubber replacements, and transponder and instrument calibrations as well. It's a requirement every 2 years. Unfortunately, if you are fitted with a transponder, even if you're operating outside of controlled airspace, it's not satisfactory to simply turn that off because it hasn't been calibrated. If your aircraft is fitted with a transponder, by law, it must be switched on and it must be calibrated. And that's a regular non-compliance finding that we see. But obviously, there's a number of flight planning requirements prior to each and every flight as well that pilots must adhere to in terms of a daily inspection, ensuring that you've got appropriate weather, that you've checked your fuel, and other pre-flight considerations prior to each and every flight. As I mentioned before, there's a number of impacts for failing to comply with these requirements. And like I mentioned, whilst a lot of people might think that, I'm competent to fly, I don't need a BFR, it's only just expired and it's 2 years out. That really is our opportunity to learn, to ensure that we haven't picked up any bad behaviors or bad habits, but also, making sure that we've been through our emergency procedures, which some pilots may not do too regularly in between BFRs, the opportunity to go through those flight planning requirements and make sure that we're up to speed on any new regs as well. Obviously, as of the 2nd of December last year, there was a whole series of new regs that came into effect, and that does mean that there are some changes for our pilots. So it's important to make sure that that compliance is up to date. But failing to do so may have other outcomes as well. It may void your insurance in the event that you do have an incident or an accident. And, you know, if you don't have a medical, then there may be something there that is of safety concern as well. Operation of an aircraft without a current BFR, without a current membership, without current registration or up-to-date maintenance, these are breaches of the regulations. And from RAAus's perspective, under CASA Part 149, we do have a legal obligation to notify CASA of any breaches that are identified. So if we identify that somebody's flying without a current BFR, without current membership, without current registration, we do unfortunately have to notify CASA of those breaches as well. So it's really important from our perspective that our members are up to date, that they are current and complying with these requirements from a safety perspective and from your own perspective in terms of legal obligations and insurance and the likes. So when we talk about near-miss events, and we've had a little bit of a chat about this already, but that 5-year data that we presented in a CASA webinar recently, which is available on the CASA website, in the CASA Pilot Safety Hub and on their YouTube channel. I've got an article page in our Week 1 content for National Safety Month, which touches on this and provides a range of resources that have been put together. And there's also a really great investigation video that CASA have put together based on an ADS-B report on alerted see and avoid and operations at non-controlled aerodromes. So I would really recommend that members go and check that out. But looking at our data over the last 5 years, so we've had 89 near-miss events reported over the last 5 years, and 74% of those actually occurred within the circuit. So, you know, a really high number within the circuit area, which is to be expected. That's where all of our traffic is coming together. But it's really important that, especially if you're operating at an aerodrome that is high density and has a high level of traffic, but also if it has different operation types, that you really are on the game. You've got your eyes outside and scanning to make sure that, and communicating, obviously, to make sure that we're up to date on any other traffic that might be around. I'm not sure how well you can see that map there, but that's an extract of a number of those 89 near-miss events or separation events over the last 5 years. And as you can tell, they do occur at mainly down the east coast of Australia, where we've got high levels of population and at busier aerodromes. Sorry. In terms of where near-miss events are likely to occur, from the data we've got available there, and as somebody pointed out before, the most common occurrence really is a breakdown of communication or a lack of situational awareness in terms of somebody actually hearing, understanding, acknowledging where that aircraft is and building that mental model as to where other aircraft is in the pattern. But we also see it occur at a much higher rate at airports with increased traffic density, airports with different types of operations, so such as gliding, parachuting, helicopters, IFR and warbirds, and also in airports that are in close proximity to another airfield, which may result in some communication issues or a misunderstanding as to which airport people are operating from, or also near complex airspace. And as we've mentioned there, so in order to avoid near-miss events, communicate. Really, at the end of the day, that is the best tool we've got available as pilots to understand where other aircraft are. Obviously, we want to have our eyes outside, but there are a number of limitations in terms of when we can see other aircraft, and often they have to be in fairly close proximity for us to be able to pick them up. So by building that picture through communication first, that's certainly the best option. Maintain standard circuit procedures. They are there for a reason. when we see somebody taking off with established traffic for an opposite direction runway, or people blasting into the circuit without completing standard joins or through standard joining procedures, we see a much higher rate of near-miss occurrences in those situations. Make sure you plan your flight appropriately. Brief before you arrive to an airport what the runway directions are, so that once you're within the vicinity of that aerodrome, you've got your plates away, you've eyes outside, join overhead where possible, and keep an eye out for other traffic. And avoid those distractions, the likes of your EFBs. They obviously offer great tools, and there's great technology available to enhance our situational awareness in terms of where other traffic might be. But there is a time and place for that as well. So whilst it might aid in us understanding that there is some traffic in our local area, it's not the time in the circuit to be watching that traffic on your EFB. We really should have our eyes outside and be trying to pick it up from there. So in that case, talking about technology and alerted, see and avoid, we're going to pass on to Matt, who's our guru in terms of radio transponders and ADS-B. So handing over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, so as Cody said, before I joined RAAus, I've got quite a bit of background in air traffic management, both in the airlines and in with Air Services Australia. So and now in this role, particularly now that the ADS-B grant is available for members to, well, for aircraft owners to take advantage of, I'm getting lots of questions, or we're all getting lots of questions about ADS-B, and certainly around the different types of transponders, what is allowed, what isn't allowed in controlled airspace. So I thought, why don't I put together a bit of a pack to share with everyone tonight, and just to talk about some of the various technology that's out there at the moment. There's a few slides, so bear with me. I promised Cody I wouldn't run over time, but I can talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles when talking about transponders and ADS-B. So kicking off, I'll go back to basics a little bit. I'm certainly no radar engineer. My engineering background was engines and airframes, and we didn't touch wires or anything that made smoke other than engines. But from an ATM perspective, we've got two main styles of radar. We've got primary surveillance radar, and that's the spinning head you see at locations around airports, at some airports around the country. It's quite old technology, developed in the Second World War, and basically all it does is sends a ping of a radio wave out into space, and then it reflects off a surface, off an aircraft in our case, and then receives it back to the radar head, and then sends that information to air traffic control. It's very basic information. It's the only information it gets is what's the relative location of that aircraft to the radar head. So that can be displayed on the ATC screen, but there's no altitude. Okay, so that's really important. So, and it doesn't look at your transponder either. It's purely getting a reflection off the airframe. Secondary surveillance radar, that's a lot more modern. I think we now call it monopulse secondary surveillance radar. And what that does, again, is a spinning head at the radar, and it shoots a beam of microwaves from a ground station up to the aircraft, and it actually reflects off the antenna of the aircraft and interrogates the transponder, which is fitted to the aircraft. The transponder then sends back information. And I'll talk about that information shortly, but it sends it back to the radar head, and then again that information's pushed out to the air traffic controller watching their screen. When we talk transponders, there's really three types that generally we see today. So there's a mode A, also known as mode 3. The only information that provides is an identifying code, which is what our squawk code is, the 4-digit squawk code that air traffic control might give us, or that we put 1200 into the transponder, and the relative position. Again, it's just the lateral position of that aircraft compared to where the radar head is at. We've also got mode C, and what mode C does, it adds altitude. So when you mix mode A and mode C, which we call a mode AC transponder, you get the squawk code, the position, and the altitude. And that's what we see in older aircraft pre-2014. That's certainly what I've got in my Grumman Tiger, and it's keeping on going. But I'm hoping to take advantage of this of the rebate scheme, which I'll talk about later. Mode S is what we see in modern aircraft these days. Mode S again is a transponder, but what it does, it actually when the secondary surveillance radar hits that antenna, the Mode S transponder actually sends a data packet containing a whole bunch of information that goes back to air traffic control. So it has the aircraft call sign, the 24-bit address, which is a hex code that you obtain when you get a Mode S transponder or an ADS-B unit. You get that from CASA. Location information, so altitude, speed, those kinds of things. And there's some other information that I think there's some fields even that we don't even use yet within the Mode S transponder. The interesting thing is for those of us who were flying around during COVID, when the major capital city airports were really empty, lots of people took advantage of flying their Cessna or their Jabiru or their Tecnam to Sydney or to Brisbane because there was no airline traffic. I looked at actually doing that in my own aircraft, but then upon looking at Ursa, I found out that actually I needed a Mode S transponder to operate to those aerodromes. And the reason being is because the ground surface radar at those capital city airports requires Mode S. It doesn't actually pick up a transponder signal with Mode AC. So that's a trap for young players, that one there. And I'd certainly encourage any of you, if we ever get the opportunity to fly into those airports again, check Ursa before you go and operate and confirm that you can operate there if you only have an AC transponder. Moving on, so here's just a bit of a diagram that I drew up, just showing the orange line and the green line. They're bidirectional, so the signal goes from the radar head up to the aircraft, bounces back, and then it sends it over to the air traffic control screen. You can also see in there I've got TCAS for air transport, and I'll talk a lot more about that later, but that's traffic collision avoidance system. And what that is, that's a box on board. It's for aircraft operating, it's mostly airliners effectively, but Part 135 and 121 aircraft using an onboard system which sends a signal out to interrogate another aircraft's transponder. So it's almost like a radar, if you like, to get that information back and to find out where other aircraft are in relation to itself, and then provides that information to pilots. But I will talk more about that shortly. I can see Jan's got a question about ADS-B in and out. I'll talk right to that now. ADS-B out is essentially, it's a VHF radio transmitter fitted to an aircraft, and it sends pretty much the same information as a Mode S transponder every few seconds from the aircraft to a VHF ground station. So that's really different to radar. So rather than the signal being generated from the ground, like we see in a radar, with ADS-B, the signal is generated by the aircraft. And the aircraft just spits out a message, a data packet every few seconds, and then that's received by a VHF ground station. Importantly, ADS-B out requires a GPS source or location source, so that the latitude and longitude basically is provided within the message in the ADS-B out message to air traffic control. And that's really important because obviously there's no radar bounce to work out where that aircraft is, so it uses GPS. Bit wordy this slide, but effectively all I'm trying to say in that next paragraph there is that in Australia we use ground stations for ADS-B. They use 1090 megahertz, and that's important because in the US have chosen to go with 1090 megahertz and a 978 UAT system as well. Reasons for that is they've got such a larger aviation industry than what we do. The geographic area of the United States is a lot more populated, so they're able to fit more technology in that space. So we've got quite a small ground station array, if you like, of ADS-B ground stations. So we chose to just use 1090. Also, 1090 allows the ATC to use it up into the upper flight levels as well. Whereas the 978 is really built for aircraft below 18,000 feet. So, we get to use 1090 for all flight levels and altitudes in Australia. The ADS-B signal, if you like, or the ground stations are limited by the shape of the Earth, believe it or not. So the higher you go in your aircraft, it's the signal that the ADS-B unit sends from the aircraft to the ground is the range is pretty much dependent on line of sight. So the higher you are, the further it goes to a degree until it runs out of power. So what we see in Australia is above 20,000 feet, pretty much. We've got complete coverage of ADS-B for anything operating above 20,000 feet. But as you get lower, there are some gaps. And that's a problem. There are some areas in Australia that don't have coverage of ADS-B, but there is some good news on the horizon. It's not even on the horizon. Aviation, who is a company from Canada, paired up with Iridium, and they now offer ADS-B satellite. So we don't need ground stations. However, Australian ATC isn't using that yet. At some stage, I would, if I was a betting man, I'd say that we'll all see the use of ADS-B satellite stations to receive our signals, and then they send it on to air traffic control. But not just yet. ADS-B in is effectively the reverse of out. Funnily enough, it's a receiver that you have on board the aircraft, either in a portable device or fitted within your avionics, to receive ADS-B out information so that can be displayed. So what you can see there is the relative position of other aircraft in relation to yourself, and I suppose build your situational awareness. It's not a traffic collision avoidance system, however. So you can see next I've got a TCAS. I've got TCAS, so traffic collision avoidance system. It uses transponder technology only. Okay, so it's a box on board an airliner which receives mode S or mode AC and mode S signals from other aircraft to alert pilots to a potential collision. It does not detect ADS-B, and that's really important for us to understand. And the reason why is because TCAS was developed some years ago before ADS-B. So at the time, it only needed to use a transponder. I understand that ICAO, so the International Civil Aviation Organization, have got working groups working towards ADS-B out, TCAS solutions. No doubt there are avionics companies out there trying to come up with solutions too, so that one day we only need to have ADS-B fitted to our aircraft rather than a transponder as well. So here's just a bit of a diagram again. I just showed similar to the other one. Rather than having a bi-directional signal from the ground station, this is simply a signal from the aircraft to the ground station to air traffic control. And you can see the GPS position source there. And then we've got ADS-B in and out. And that's the two aircraft seeing each other using ADS-B in and out if they're fitted with ADS-B in. So typical installations of ADS-B, what we typically see these days is a Mode S transponder with extended squitter. Oops, I don't know if that was me. With extended squitter, and what that does is says, well, that Mode S transponder can be paired. It has ADS-B capability. It just needs a certified GPS position source to also put out an ADS-B signal, so that outside of radar coverage, a ADS-B signal, if it's within distance of a ground station, can be picked up by air traffic control. ADS-B out was mandated for all IFR aircraft in Australia back in 2014, and there's a bunch of other mandates too. So in my case, with my aircraft, I've got a Mode AC transponder. If that was to fail, I can't refit an AC transponder. I must actually fit a Mode S transponder. And as Cody mentioned before, if the transponder in my aircraft becomes unserviceable, I have to get approval to operate that aircraft at all, because I've got a transponder fitted, I'm not allowed to operate without it functioning, and that's just in the rules. The reason behind that, it's a pretty black and white rule, and you know, some may say draconian, but at the end of the day, the idea is to try and get people to use this technology because it really does benefit safety. ADS-B, so that an installed unit with a certified transponder and GPS source is used by air traffic control in controlled airspace for separation. I mentioned before, if you're outside of radar coverage with your MODES transponder, well, if you've got ADS-B, ATC will still see you with that using your ADS-B, provided you're in range of an ADS-B ground station. But most of the time you are. There are some cheaper installations cheaper. What am I trying to say here? That's what I'm trying to say here. Older installations typically just have ADS-B out, but the newer versions of transponders, which I'll show you a couple of examples shortly, they actually have built-in ADS-B out and in to give you that situational display. And that's all built into your flight deck or your cockpit avionics suite. The next one, which we see in RAAus as being really popular, is the electronic conspicuity device. And there's a mouthful for you, an EC device. And the Sky Echo produced by Avionics is probably the most well known. I don't even know if there are any others, to be honest. But the Sky Echo 2, and we've got had a deal running with Mendelssohn's pilot suppliers down in Melbourne. So a special call out to Roy down there, who was giving RAAus members discounts on those devices. But they can be seen, an EC device can be seen by another aircraft with ADS-B in. So these Sky Echoes are ADS-B out and ADS-B in. And therefore, because they're punching out a signal, other aircraft can see it if they've got a display, which is great for building situational awareness. It does not contain a transponder. So what that doesn't allow you to do is operate in controlled airspace, because you need a transponder in Class Charlie airspace, Class C airspace at least. You don't need it in Class D, but you can't operate in Class C airspace without that transponder. Also, and this is probably one of the biggest questions I see, or that I receive from members, is about can ATC see me when I'm using my Sky Echo? The answer is no, and there's a couple of good reasons for that. Effectively, the first reason is that the avionics or the electronics of the device aren't certified, and therefore you can't guarantee integrity of the positional information displayed to air traffic controllers. Now, we all know that with our iPhones and the like, that those types, GPS is pretty accurate these days, but ultimately air traffic control need very, very, very accurate information displayed for them, because they've got lots of people on their screens that they're trying to keep apart. So that's the first reason. The second reason, which is an interesting one, is if every hang glider and aeroplane and helicopter has an EC device, what is the impact on air traffic control when all of a sudden they're operating with, let's say, 30 targets on their screen at one time, and then everyone turns on their ADS-B, and we end up seeing 200 targets on their screen. And I think they call them targets, so apologies to the ATCs out there, but the symbols that the ATC sees. So there's a human factors issue there that needs to be explored by air traffic control, not just in Australia but globally. And certainly from an RAAus perspective, I've spoken to senior people in Air Services Australia to put forward our support for an engineering trial, and I know I've spoken to a number of members about participating in such a trial, just to see what that human factors element is, and also from a system integrity perspective as well. And therefore, what would happen if we turned these things on in anger and air traffic control could see them? Of course, that would all be done under very controlled circumstances as well. We're not just going to have a crack. So thanks to Air Services for certainly being willing to look into that. The other thing with an EC device is, because they're powered by battery, they actually don't have a huge amount of range. So they're a low wattage device. They don't have the transmission power as what a fitted ADS-B unit has on board an aircraft. So they actually don't have the range, and therefore below, as I said before, below 20,000 feet, some of our ADS-B stations produce a bit of a patchy coverage across Australia, and therefore they would be going in and out of coverage very often. Basically, it depends on your altitude and where you've got the unit situated on board the aircraft, usually suction cup to the windscreen or a window. But it's really, we're unsure at this point in time what the average acceptable range is of these devices. But it's somewhere, I've heard anywhere between 10, 20, 30 nautical miles, depending upon fitment and weather and all those things. And like I said before, TCAS uses transponders. So an airliner wouldn't see a EC device or an ADS-B only device. So that's really important, particularly for airliners operating into CTAFs around the country. We know Ballina has been an issue. So that's a real interesting one there. One would think that looking at a modern 737-800 aircraft that it would have ADS-B in, but it does not. My time at Qantas, I can say that the only aircraft that we had in the fleet that had ADS-B in at that time, and that might have changed in the last 18 months, was the 787-9. No other aircraft in the main Qantas fleet had ADS-B in. So yeah, there's a bit of interesting trivia for you. Transponders. So I mentioned before, we've got different types. The first one up there is what we would see in a 1990s style aircraft, early 2000s. So a Garmin GTX 327 looks, pretty modern and new, but it's mode AC. The next one, and it's not ADS-B at all. The next one is a GTX 330 ES. So it's ADS-B capable, but you've got to add the navigation component to that. And then it becomes a Mode S and an ADS-B out solution. Interestingly, they both look exactly the same, the 327 and the 330. So up in the top right corner, if you've got an eagle eye, you can see that the part numbers there. And the last solution there is the GNX 375, and it's the bee's knees at the moment of transponders with ADS-B. So it's Mode S, ADS-B in and out. So you can see it's got a display there. And so it can be used as a navigator as well. So it's a pretty nice piece of kit. What we see in RAAus, however, in a more typical display for RAAus, many of us know about the Dynon avionics, fantastic gear in a lot of our new or modern style aircraft. And the Dynon Skyview can have a transponder fitted within it as well, a Mode S transponder. I've got a little circle, dotted circle up there, and that just shows that it's squawking, this particular one's squawking 1200. And that shows that we've got a transponder on board. But if we add the GPS 2020, we actually end up with ADS-B out and a Mode S transponder. And then if we add the ADS-B 472, that's actually a ADS-B receiver. So all of a sudden, we've got full ADS-B in and out. And on the nav display there on the right-hand side, traffic will also be displayed. So some really great kit out there for our members and industry in general to take advantage of. EC devices, I mentioned before, quite a small device, about the size, I don't know, old school, cigarette packet. But when paired with an iPad and an Oz Runways, who I'll just special call out to our sponsor tonight, you can get great situational awareness of those around you, but also let other people know who else is around you. It's got ADS-B in and out. I've just got out there, but it's actually in and out. Cannot be used for ATC, as I mentioned before. It's filtered out of the ATC system. It's therefore only air-to-air situational awareness only. And as Cody mentioned before, does not replace alerted see and avoid. So these are great tools, particularly in the en route environment, or just trying to build your picture up. But we know there's different models of EFBs that don't talk, share traffic, and there's, we've talked about that ad nauseum previously. Many people don't have ADS-B, so it only gives you some of the picture when you use these electronic devices at the moment. So, certainly be aware of the limitations of these devices. And as Cody said, flying into Temora last weekend or the weekend before, I was at 10 miles. I could see the aerodrome. My iPad literally goes in my bag. I put it away. I'm not going to be distracted by it. And I use the Mark 1 eyeball. Interesting, on my departure out of Temora on the same day, there was 2 aircraft that departed prior to myself, and I was sitting at the run-up bay, listening to these radio calls, watching these 2 aircraft depart, building my own mental picture. I knew they were heading to the east, just like me. And then I got a symbol on my Oz runway showing one of these aircraft, not both of them. Okay, so had I not been building that picture for myself, I wouldn't have actually had full situational awareness of where both those aircraft are or were. So, there's limitations. Don't put all your faith in these devices just yet. Just a little bit on TCAS, so versus ADS-B. So the first display there is an ADS-B in display. I think it was off a Garmin 1000, which is a nice piece of kit on board many general aviation aircraft today. If you have a look at the white aeroplane there in the middle, that's supposed to be us, and then just up to the northeast of us, there's a black target inbound. You can see a trend line there. There's a plus 21. I think that means it's 2,100 feet above us. But there's no alerting. There's no oral alerting. There's no standard symbology for these kind of things. You can use different EFBs or different avionics that don't necessarily really show standards. So ADS-B is still in the is still in the development phase in terms of really being able to use for real pilot separation and those kinds of things. They're really about providing us with that situational awareness. The next one, the TCAS, this is what we see in airliners. You can see a range of symbols there. Obviously the red one, that's bad, that's right in front of us. That's a resolution advisory. The TCAS unit is working off the transponders, not ADS-B. It gives us the relative position, both vertical and lateral, from the other aircraft. It also has oral and visual alerting functions for pilots. Okay, this is really important because we know that both of those sensors are required to try and bring to the attention something of a pilot. So really important, that alerting function. It's mandated for all airliners pretty much globally these days. But the other really important thing for TCAS is it provides instructions to pilots of both aircraft, not just me, both aircraft, provided the other aircraft, of course, has TCAS. So it'll tell me to descend or and the other aircraft to climb. And it puts visual cues, depending on the system, but visual cues on the situational display for pilots. So it's a really nice piece of kit that's very, very useful and been a very big last-ditch safety enhancement, shall I say. Importantly, with TCAS, when air traffic control or designers of airspace are looking at airspace design, they're not factoring in ever using TCAS. Okay, in fact, I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to use a TCAS. Use TCAS as a safety control when you're building a safety case for airspace design, because it's really a last-ditch effort. It's not there to help pilots separate themselves. It's really there as a last-ditch effort to stop collisions occurring. All right, I'm getting towards the end. There's lots of other information available. The plain English guide that CASA produced for Part 91, if you look at page 162, 163, it really spells out what avionics you need for the different classes of airspace. There's a brilliant advisory circular, which provides a lot more information in depth. And then Air Services have also got a great ADS-B page as well. And there's a great video on there, goes for about 6 minutes, and pretty much explains what I did tonight, but nice and flash. So I'd encourage those of you interested to keep looking at further at that information. Finally, the ADS-B rebate scheme. This is something I'm really proud of, and RAAus is really proud of playing a part in helping that scheme get up and running. $30 million package to assist Australian aircraft owners fit their aircraft with ADS-B. It's over 2 years, but I'm also told that it's over 2 years or when funding is exhausted. Grants up to 5,000 people. $5,000 per eligible aircraft, covering up to 50% of an eligible project. Speaking with the team at the Department of Industry, as I have done, and I'd like to special call out to them. I know they're getting a lot of applications, so thanks for all the hard work. There's just some tidbits on this screen I'd just like to run through. I've had some feedback from members, having issues with trying to apply. So the feedback I got from the team today was, if you're using if you're purchasing it for personal use, don't put in an ABN number in the program selection section of the form, even if you have an ABN. So if it's only for personal use, don't put in your ABN. If it's for business use, you have to put in an ABN. Aircraft's registration certificate must be clear because it's all electronic. It needs to be clear and it needs to be current. Okay, and the expiration obviously needs to be in the future. The paid tax invoice, so you've gone and purchased a piece of ADS-B kit. The tax invoice must clearly show that you've paid the whole amount owing, and the payment method provided. I understand that's been holding some people up, and apparently any cents included in the expenditure must be rounded down to the nearest dollar figure. We wouldn't want to spend 49 cents as a nation over giving too many people too much money. But also remember that the travel and accommodation of installers, so your LAMI for installing this equipment, is not covered within the rebate. So it's really just the kit and the hours spent by the LAMI installing it. They were at pains to tell me also, if you've got any questions, give them a call, 13 28 46, or you can use the chat function on business.gov.au. So yeah, so thanks to the Australian government. I think that's a pretty good deal for us all. That's about it from me. I'm not sure. I didn't look at the chat module there, Cody, but I'm not sure if there's any questions. But I might hand back over.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And if anyone does have any questions over the next few minutes while I finish off, feel free to throw it in that chat box on the website page that we've got there, or on YouTube or Facebook if you're joining us from there tonight. There are a couple of comments throughout there. Miko from Garmin also said there's a Garmin GTX 335 and 345 units with built-in GPS receiver. Garmin's got a range of great pilot products, not just ADS-B, but personal products such as watches and other devices, and have been a long-term supporter of RAAus and National Safety Month as well. So go and check out those Garmin products, and thanks, Miko, for joining this evening. But yeah, some really great information there, and certainly, understanding that whilst these devices have a place, there are also some limitations. It is important to understand that the likes of the Sky Echo ADS-B device does have some limitations in terms of the fact that it can't currently be seen by ATC. It may be something that they activate in the future, but at this point in time, that's all filtered out. But also that those devices can't be seen by TCAS. So if you're flying around with your Sky Echo, that airline traffic won't be able to see you unless you've actually got a transponder. So obviously all of these devices are great and they enhance situational awareness, but they obviously require that other aircraft are fitted with compatible equipment to see and be seen in relation to those other aircraft, just with the likes of traffic alerts on your EFB and the likes there. I'm not sure if there were any other questions at this point in time. So I might carry on with just a few more slides. Promise I don't have too much further to go. And we'll come back to any questions very soon. But in relation to this week's prize draw for National Safety Month, we've got those 3 great prizes there. Enter on our website, rails.com.au/National Safety Month. Go to our week 1 where this video was hosted tonight, and our code word there to enter the draw this week. Code word is I'm safe. So make sure you throw that code word in on that website page and go from there. So I just want to touch base before we finish up on a couple more points. And first of those is reporting. So obviously, it's really important that we receive occurrence reports from our membership. The data that we've displayed in this presentation tonight and our safety campaigns are pointed in the right direction by the occurrence reports we're seeing. But not only that, it is a mandatory requirement for all of our pilots and our maintainers to be submitting occurrence reports for accidents, incidents, defects, and the likes. So any occurrence reports can be reported at reporting.raus.com.au. If you do unfortunately have an accident, that must be notified to RAAus as soon as practicable via phone, and a written report must be submitted within 72 hours. There are also TSI Act requirements to report to the ADS-B. If you use RAAus' reporting system, then we will forward that report onto the ADS-B on your behalf, fulfilling your TSI Act requirements so that you don't have to complete 2 reports. So really important from our perspective that we're getting those reports in. On our system, you can report accidents, incidents, but you can also report defects, hazards, and complaints as well. So if you've observed some illegal activity or something that doesn't look right, you can submit a complaint, or obviously if you have a concern in relation to RAAus, you can submit a complaint into that system. But also if you've identified a hazard, so it's not necessarily an accident or an incident, it might be something at your local airport that you believe might be a danger to aviation safety, you can throw in a hazard report there too. Our team will review all of those, and we've had some really great safety outcomes from some of these occurrence reports. Defect reporting for maintainers, we ensure that information is making it right back to our distributors so that mandatory service bulletins or service alerts can be sent out to aircraft owners if there's a greater safety concern for our membership base. And obviously, nobody likes to encounter an occurrence, and people become a little bit hesitant in terms of reporting. I just want to make it very clear that RAAus does have a just culture. We're not taking these occurrence reports and using them for disciplinary action because somebody's made a mistake. It's an opportunity to learn. It's obviously an opportunity for us to understand what's taking place out in the environment, but it's also a really good opportunity for our ops or tech team to debrief with you what might have happened. These events are embarrassing, and they can also, leave an impact and leave us, quite upset or shocked. So by submitting that report allows us to touch base with you, break down what might have occurred and what we can do to prevent those occurrences from happening again in the future. Now, obviously, if there has been willful non-compliance and we identify that, then there is an obligation that something's done about that. If there's illegal activities taking place, a just culture is about being fair but accountable, so it doesn't overwrite the need to abide by the rules. But if you simply made a mistake, and even if it is your own fault, we're not going to take disciplinary action when it hasn't been a willful outcome. So really important. Please submit those reports in at reporting.raus.com.au. One of the last points I want to touch on is loss of control. Obviously, in our top occurrence types there, it was reported, and it is the number one cause of serious and fatal accidents that we see at RAAus. By far the largest cause of damage to aircraft and injuries is because of loss of control events, and they occur during takeoff, in flight, and also during landing. Runway loss of control events is where we see majority of our aircraft damage occur. Often due to environmental factors, people who have elected to take a crosswind or a tailwind, thinking that, I've done that before, I can handle it, it's fine, and they get caught out by the environmental conditions, or not maintaining a stabilized approach or conducting a go-around. These things can result in hard landings and undercarriage collapses. They can also result in loss of control of the aircraft and running off the side of the runway, for example, where we see a lot of our damage. So because of this, and because loss of control has been a really high-level safety focus for RAAus over the last few years, we've actually commissioned a brand new video series, which we are launching the first week of November, actually, which is our loss of control video series, which is 3 parts. We've got part 1 is takeoff, part 2 is in-flight, and part 3 will be landing and looking at loss of control events, looking at some real-life occurrences and talking to some pilots who've encountered these types of situations and breaking those down, hopefully in a way in which people come out with a really good understanding of what they should be doing to avoid loss of control events, what further training we can conduct in terms of loss of control. And yeah, just some really good takeaways in terms of avoiding loss of control. So we will close out today's seminar via our trailer that we've got for our loss of control series, which we're really excited about. I think it's a really great publication. Neil Schaefer's been a driver in that project and is really passionate about this. It's really topical at the moment and a really great safety initiative, I think, if I do say so myself. So before we close up and before we go to any comments that might have popped up there, again, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our week 1 major sponsor, which is RAAus. They are a long-term sponsor of National Safety Month, and please jump into that code word that was given earlier, and you'll go on the draw to win one of the 3 prizes in our week 1 draw. Now, you do have to be a current financial flying or junior member to win that Sky Echo, but if you're just a subscriber of RAAus or a temporary member or the likes, then you can also go on the draw to win that GME PLB, thanks to GME, and an RAAus subscription we're giving away. The Sky Echo is also courtesy of RAAus, so a big thanks to RAAus. And obviously a massive thanks to our sponsors for National Safety Month this year. We've got 3 more great prize packs over the next coming 3 weeks. And we've got some really exciting prizes there with over $10,000 worth of giveaways throughout October. So please touch base. We've got a live stream over the next 3 Thursday evenings as well. Next week, our tech team will be reporting in on aircraft maintenance, focus areas for aircraft owners and maintainers. So that'll no doubt be full of lots of great information as well. And before we go, do we have any other comments or questions there?
I might just chime in first, Cody, if I may.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank you and the safety team and all the staff at RAAus. You know, these National Safety Month is an incredibly important month for RAAus, and it's great to see us engaging with our members. So thanks for everyone coming tonight. There's a lot of work that goes into this. Of course, we've got our sponsors, so we're very grateful for our sponsors. But this is a fantastic initiative, started well before my time, National Safety Month, and it's something we are very proud of. And you know, as aviators, safety always needs to be a priority for us. So you know, we put a lot of effort into this, and you know, I think RAAus really speaks to wanting our members and wanting aviators in general just to be safe, right? And that's what this is all about. So well done to Cody and the team, and once again, thanks to our sponsors.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for everyone for joining in this afternoon, or this evening, rather. Just to summarize a few of those points from our discussion this evening. Obviously, you know, we have noticed over the last 6 months to 10 months this year an increase in those weather-related events due to obviously the conditions that we've experienced around the country. So please really do keep note of those weather reports before you go flying. Don't be tempted just because it's been a while to go out and push on in unfavorable conditions. And if conditions aren't great, even consider jumping in with an instructor and go flying, which gives you the ability to go out in some conditions that you may not be as comfortable with yourself and also enhance your skills. Pilot experience is one of those areas where we've seen leading to a number of serious or fatal accidents. So please ensure that you are current on your aircraft type, that you are up to speed, you've completed your BFR, and also, you know, if you're new to an aircraft type, get that training with an instructor to build that experience. Safety non-controlled aerodromes. CASA's got some fantastic resources. Check out our safety page for some of those videos, and check out the CASA Safety Pilot Hub, which they've launched a few weeks ago as well. Some great information there from Matt on ADS-B and some of the options available. So consider equipping your aircraft, and also take opportunity of that ADS-B rebate scheme that is currently running if you own an eligible aircraft. And obviously, safety reporting is really important from our perspective, that we have those reports coming through. Even if it's something minor, a minor incident, it is mandatory that those things are reported through to RAAus. So please send those reports through. It enhances safety for all of our community by us understanding. And if we see a bunch of different occurrences, even if they're minor, occurring at a single hotspot, it may also enable us to reach out to an aerodrome operator and see what we can do about enhancing safety. So as a single occurrence, it may not seem like a big deal, but you don't know, there might be a bunch of occurrences that may be happening there. And if we can see that trend, then we can actually do something about it. And obviously keep an eye out for our loss of control series that we'll be launching. We've got that first video premiering the first week of November. I would strongly recommend that anyone who flies checks out that video series. Some great takeaways, and obviously it's our intention to reduce loss of control events, not only within RAAus operations, but within GA around the country as one of the leading occurrence types in Australia and around the world. So that's all for me. Thanks for tuning in. Matt, do you have anything to close out on?
No, Cody, thanks everyone for sticking around, and I'd encourage you all to watch this next trailer that Cody's going to show. It's a great piece of work, and yeah, see you at the next ones.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining everyone, and we'll leave you with the trailer for our upcoming loss of control series. Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Good night.
Every year in sport and general aviation, loss of control events are the single most significant contributor to serious and fatal aircraft accidents.
Recognising the onset early and avoiding it in the first place.
By the time I'd got it and the aircraft had become airborne in the 3-point attitude, I probably didn't even have time to think, oh shit.
The plane went into about a 360-degree stall spin and impacted the ground.
It's a clear stall spin, high nose attitude and then a stall.
As we start to lose visual reference to the natural horizon, we start to lose our situational awareness as to what the aircraft is doing.
In this 3-part series, we explore the critical phases of flight where loss of control occur. We look at the primary causes, we look at contributing factors, and we talk to real pilots, subject matter experts, and we delve into the situations and how to avoid these types of accidents.
We've used too much rudder to keep the aircraft in balance on a full power climb, for example. And now the aeroplane is very slutty. Now I've gone over.
Left rudder and departure. And we've got your visual again. We'll press the right turn just to track away from the houses, mate.
If we can save just one life, it will be worth making this series.
1, 2, 3. We've just lost over 10 knots. If we're only 200 feet, look what we lost. Yeah, we're in the ground already. That's right.
We hope that this series will help create a safer flight environment for our pilots.